They told my daughter, in her therapist's office, that I had abandoned her when she was 8 years old. I never abandoned her. Her mother took her. Her mother gave her the words to say. So when a woman I'd never met called me on a Thursday afternoon and said, "I'm Chloe's therapist, and I need to ask you something before I can help her," I sat on the concrete step behind my repair shop, and my hands started to shake. 6 words is all I said. "I never left. You took her." She went quiet for a long time. Then she asked me to send her one piece of written proof. I did. That call was only the opening move. What I found in the folder my father had been keeping since our daughter was 8 rewrote every assumption I had made about that child, and it set off a chain of events that ended with Marin sitting in a wood-paneled courtroom in Portland, finally saying out loud in front of everyone what she had done. If this channel has ever made you feel like you weren't the villain in your own story, hit subscribe. You belong here. And if you've ever had someone rewrite the record of who you are, drop a comment. I want to read it. But before I tell you what I sent the therapist, you need to know how a quiet appliance repairman from a coastal town in Maine ended up on the back step of his shop, hands shaking at 57, defending himself against a daughter he hadn't hugged in 11 years. 1. I met Marin Yardley in the spring of 1997, in the back booth of a diner off Route 1 in Brunswick. She had a paperback open on the table, face down, with a coffee ring on the page, and she told me the coffee ring was the reason she kept it. I laughed for the first time in a week, and she noticed, and that's how I knew I was already in trouble. We married in 2000. Chloe was born in 2004. I ran a one-van appliance repair business I inherited from my father. Marin worked part-time at a real estate office that did not pay her what she deserved. We were not rich. We were not poor. We bought a small house on a street that ended at the Clamming Flats, and we put in a garden because she said her daughter would have one too. For 10 years I thought I had everything. A wife who laughed too loudly in the kitchen. A daughter who called me tool man because I always had a screwdriver in my hand. 2 bedrooms that smelled like pine sol in summer and wood smoke in winter. The sound of Marin's keys in the door at 6:15 every evening, and the way she set down her bag in the same spot every night, as if the spot was part of who she was. Then Richard entered the picture, and the spot was empty. 2. Richard Penner was what Brunswick calls a developer. He had a house on the harbor, 2 new trucks, the kind of cufflinks that click when men shake hands. He owned Marin's office. He owned the office above the office. He was the kind of man whose name was on a brass plate, and our town didn't have many. He started showing up in Marin's life around 2013. Christmas party in 2014, where she stood 40 minutes near the bar while I stood on the porch in my good coat, freezing, watching her laugh at something he leaned in and said. I drove home alone that night. I knew it was the beginning of the worst part of my life. I just didn't know how right I was. By February of 2015, she had stopped sleeping in our bed 3 nights a week. By March, she had retained a lawyer. By April, she had asked me, over pasta at the kitchen table, while Chloe was at a friend's house, "Do you think we should consider what would be best for Chloe if we weren't together?" I remember the pasta, the brand of sauce, the chair I sat in. She had rehearsed it. Her eyes were wet, but her hands were perfectly still, and people whose hands are still when their eyes are wet have been practicing. I said no. She asked me to think about it. I did. I said no again. 2 weeks later she filed anyway. 3. What followed was 2 years of lawyers, mediators, and a custody fight that nearly broke me in half. I will not give you every date. I will give you the parts that matter. The first thing Marin's lawyer argued in open court on a Tuesday in October was that I had never bonded with Chloe. He said the word bonded 11 times, I counted. He held up a photograph of Chloe at age 3, holding a screwdriver my father had given her, and he said, "Your Honor, you can see in this child's posture that the defendant preferred his tools to his daughter." I wanted to stand up. My lawyer put his hand on my arm. I paid every bill the court assigned. Child support, health insurance, half of Chloe's dance lessons, half of her orthodontist. I paid for the dress she wore to her middle school graduation, even though I wasn't allowed to attend. I sent birthday cards every year. They came back every year, with the envelope slit open at the top and the card inside untouched, and "Return to sender" written across the front in Marin's handwriting. I sent them every year. I was allowed 4 supervised visits a year, in a room at the Y, with a caseworker sitting 4 feet away looking at her phone. Chloe sat across from me and called me Marcus. Not Dad, not Daddy, Marcus. I corrected her once, gently, and the caseworker made a note in her file. I never corrected her again. In 2016, the court cut my visits from 4 to 2. In 2017, from 2 to 1. The court's reasoning, in both orders, was that the child consistently demonstrates distress in the presence of the respondent. I never raised my voice in those rooms. I never touched her without asking. I never once said a single unkind word about her mother, even when she was 10 feet away listening. The court did not care. 4. The lie didn't start with Chloe. It started with a single paragraph in a sealed 2016 filing that I didn't read until 4 years later, in a manila folder that was supposed to be shredded but wasn't. Marcus Holloway abandoned his family in March of 2015. On the stand, I was never asked about that line. The judge ruled on it off the page. Marin never said it in open court. She didn't need to. The sentence grew. It found its way into a letter to Chloe's pediatrician, into the school counselor's notes, into a conversation Marin had with our pastor, who passed it to my mother, who stopped calling me on Sundays. By the time Chloe was 12, she was telling her teachers, in her own words, that her father had abandoned her. I know because one of her teachers, a woman named Mrs. Adderley, called me after a parent-teacher night in 2018 and said, "Marcus, your daughter is telling people you left." I thanked her. I sat in my truck for an hour. The next morning I tried to call Marin. She did not pick up. She did not call back. What I want you to understand is what I did during those years. I did not disappear. I did not drink. I did not move away. I woke at 5:30, drove my van 40 miles each way when I had to, repaired refrigerators and dryers and the kind of washing machines that hold a family together when everything else is falling apart. I ate dinner alone at my kitchen table. I sent Chloe a card on her birthday and a card on the day she was born, every year, even when they came back. In 2019, an old friend of mine, Ellis Carney, who had been my first customer when I was 19, fell ill. He lived alone in a small cottage on the harbor his grandfather had built. He had no children. His wife had died in 2002. He called me on a Sunday morning and said, "Marcus, when I'm gone, I'd like you to have the cottage. I'm telling my lawyer the same thing today." Ellis died in March of 2020. His lawyer called me the next week. The deed was signed. I moved in by June. I painted the upstairs the same off-white Marin had liked. I put one picture of Chloe on the mantel, the one of her at age 4 holding her first fishing pole, and I left it there for 10 months until the day I decided it was too painful to look at, and I moved it into a drawer in the kitchen. That is what I did. I worked. I sent cards. I tried in my own awkward way not to die of the missing. 5. I lost track of the years, the honest way to say it. I turned 53, then 54, then 55. The empty got easier the longer it went on. That's a thing nobody warns you about. Grief gets smaller, but it doesn't go away. It just learns how to be polite. Then in the spring of 2025, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A woman with a soft voice said, "Mr. Holloway, my name is Dr. Lena Adair. I'm a licensed therapist in Portland. A client of mine, who you'll know as Chloe Holloway Yardley, has been writing a personal essay for a college transfer application, and in it she has described you as the father who abandoned her family when she was 8. Before I can ethically proceed, I am required to ask whether that characterization is accurate." 6 words is what I said. "I never left. You took her." There was a long silence. Then she said she'd ask me for one thing in writing. I told her I would, that night. I hung up. I went into the closet in the front bedroom, where I had put, years before, a single manila folder I had never been willing to throw away. 6. The folder had been my father's. After he died in 2012, I found it on his desk at the shop, half full with a rubber band around it, and on the front in his handwriting, Marcus, keep. Inside was the proof I had been carrying for 20 years without understanding why. A typed transcript of the kitchen conversation in which Marin had rehearsed her request for divorce. A printed copy of the 2016 filing, with the abandoned line highlighted in yellow. A photograph of the kitchen from the dining room, showing the brand of sauce on the table. A voice memo on a USB drive, in which Marin told her sister in 2017 that Chloe is starting to believe it herself, which is the only thing that makes this work long-term. A check stub from my first child support payment, with the date stamped in my father's hand. And at the very back, a one-page note Marin had typed for Chloe in 2016, when Chloe was 11, instructing her, in capital letters, in the spelling and grammar of a child her age, what to say if any adult ever asked about her father. The note said, in part, "Remember, Daddy moved away in March. He did not want us anymore. If anyone asks, this is the only answer. Do not change it." What I found rewrote every assumption I had made about my daughter's memory. She had not invented the line. She had been given it, the way you give a child a script for a school play. And somewhere between 11 and 19, she had stopped knowing the difference between the script and her own life. I sat on the floor of the front bedroom. I held the note for a long time. Then I made a pot of coffee. I called Dr. Adair back. 7. What I sent her that night was a single page. The note? I scanned it. I emailed it. I did not editorialize. I did not attach a letter. Only the proof. 2 days later she called back. She said, "Mr. Holloway, I have read what you sent. I am going to bring this up gently with your daughter in our next session, and I want you to know that she will make her own choice about what she does with it, and I cannot promise you what that choice will be." I told her I understood. She added quietly, she also asked me at the end of our last session whether her father was still alive. I told her he was. She did not ask me anything else. I put the phone down. I opened the drawer where I had put the photograph of Chloe at 4, holding her first fishing pole, and I looked at it for a long time. Then I put it back on the mantel. That should have been the end of it. It wasn't. 8. Marin had been told by a friend of a friend that I had sent some kind of legal letter to a Portland therapist. By Saturday, Marin knew exactly what I had sent. By Sunday, she had called Richard. By Monday, Richard had called my shop. He did not shout. Richard is not a man who shouts. He said, "Marcus, I want you to think about your daughter before you decide to make her relive a painful part of her childhood for your own satisfaction." I told him, calmly, that I had no interest in making her relive anything, and that I was not the one who had given her a script to memorize. He said, "Don't play the victim." I said, "Richard, I am the only person in this who has ever played the actual victim." He hung up. The next morning I got a letter, hand-delivered, from a lawyer whose name I didn't recognize, informing me that Marin had filed an emergency motion to permanently seal the 2016 custody record, citing an attempt by the non-custodial parent to destabilize the therapeutic process of the minor child. I called my own lawyer, Howard Pike, who had just turned 70 and still practiced from his kitchen table in Yarmouth. He said, "Marcus, sit down. We're going to fight this. But I need you to understand something first." Marin's filing included an affidavit signed by Chloe, dated the previous week, in which she said, under oath, "My father chose to leave our family in March of 2015, and I have carried the pain of that abandonment with me every day of my life." Howard asked me, "Did you leave?" I told him I had not. He asked, "Do you have proof?" I told him I had more proof than any father should ever need to have of who he was. We filed a motion to intervene, a counter-motion to unseal, a motion to compel every document, audio file, and email exchanged between Marin and her lawyer regarding the original filing. And then I did the thing she least expected. 9. I called Dr. Adair. I told her what Marin had filed. I asked whether she would be willing, under subpoena, to testify to the authenticity of the note. She said after a pause, "Mr. Holloway, I have been in this field for 19 years. I have never seen a parent coached in writing. I will testify. I will also recommend separately that your daughter be evaluated by an independent clinician because the affidavit she signed is inconsistent with the work we have been doing in session, and I want the court to know that. I thanked her. I did not push further. I also contacted Chloe's college. Through Howard, I asked whether the transfer essay that had triggered Dr. Adair's call could be introduced, under seal, into the family court record, for the limited purpose of showing the court the original source of the current affidavit. Within a week, the dean of students agreed. The essay was 1,400 words. I asked Howard not to let me read it yet. I wanted to be the version of myself my daughter deserved when I finally did. The hearing was scheduled for the second Tuesday in November. I had 6 weeks. For 6 weeks I worked. I slept less. I read every page of the original custody record, which a clerk had finally unsealed, in a stack on my kitchen table 2 inches thick. And I left one voicemail on a Tuesday afternoon in October on Chloe's college line. I said, "Hi, sweetheart, it's Dad. I know you don't want to hear from me. I have wanted to call for 11 years, and I have not, because I was trying to respect the only boundary your mother ever asked me to keep, and I have just found out that boundary was a lie. If you want to call me back, my number is on this message. If you don't, that's okay. But I want you to know that I have never in your entire life missed a birthday card, and I have never missed the day you were born. The man your mother told you I am is not the man I am. I love you. I'm sorry I didn't fight harder." I do not know if she heard it. 10. The morning of the hearing, I drove to Portland in my work van, because it is the only vehicle I own. I wore the gray suit I had bought in 2015 for Chloe's middle school graduation, the one I was not allowed to wear into the room. I had let the elbows go that summer and repressed them the week before. I parked at 8:15. I had a passenger. I had asked Dr. Adair to ride with me because I knew I would not be able to walk into that building alone. She did not speak until we were both out of the van, and then she put her hand on my arm and said, "Marcus, you are not on trial today." I said, "I have been on trial every day for 11 years. Inside the courthouse, 3rd floor, courtroom 4, Judge Eleanor Marsh presiding. Marin was there. Richard was there. Richard's lawyer was there. Howard was there. Dr. Adair was there. Chloe was not. Marin's lawyer called Marin to the stand first. He led her gently through the same 11-year-old story. That I had drifted. That I had chosen work over my family. That I had failed to show up for Chloe emotionally. That on a March afternoon in 2015 I had said, "You are better off without me," a sentence he repeated 3 times for the court reporter, that I had never in my life said. I did not flinch. Richard was looking at his hands. Howard stood. He approached the bench. He handed the judge a single page in a clear plastic sleeve and asked her to read it silently before he called his first witness. She read it. She looked at Marin. She looked back down. She said, "You may proceed." She had not seen Marin look confused in 11 years. Marin looked confused. Howard called Marin back. He asked, "Mrs. Yardley Penner, did you, in the spring of 2016, type a 1-page script for your daughter Chloe, instructing her in the words to use if any adult ever asked about her father?" Marin said no. Howard handed the judge the same page. The judge read it aloud, verbatim, in open court. The room was silent. Richard stood up in the gallery at the end of Dr. Adair's testimony, said, "I'm sorry, Your Honor, I have to leave," and walked out. He did not come back. Howard called Dr. Adair. She testified to the chain of custody of the note. She testified to the essay. She testified, under cross-examination, that the language in Chloe's affidavit was not Chloe's language, that Chloe's own language, in session, had been turning for 3 months toward doubt. She testified that Chloe had said 2 weeks earlier that she was not sure her memory was her own. Marin's lawyer objected twice, both times overruled. Howard rested. The judge asked if there was anything else. Howard said, "Your Honor, may the record reflect that the respondent has one final exhibit for the limited purpose of clarifying the court's earlier finding." The judge said yes. He handed her a second page. The original 2016 filing with the abandoned line highlighted in yellow. The line that had grown, by repetition, into the only thing anyone knew about me. The judge read it. She set both pages in front of her. She looked at Marin. She asked, "Mrs. Yardley Penner, do you have any objection to a finding on the record that the characterization of Marcus Holloway in the 2016 order was inaccurate, and that the order is amended to remove that characterization?" Marin said, in a voice I had not heard from her before, "No, Your Honor, I have no objection." The judge signed the order at the bench. 11. I thought they were done. I was wrong. After the order was signed, the clerk said, "Will the daughter of the respondent, Chloe Holloway Yardley, please approach the bench?" Chloe stood up from the back row, where she had been sitting alone in a black coat behind a pillar so I could not see her from the witness table. She had been in the room the entire time. She had her mother's face, except for one thing. Her hands were shaking. Her hands were shaking the way mine had shaken on the back step of my shop, the day the therapist called. The judge asked gently if she had anything she wanted to say on the record. Chloe looked at me. I had never seen her face at 19. I had last seen her face at 8. She said, "I would like to apologize to my father. I have been saying a sentence for 11 years that my mother typed for me, and I didn't know until 3 weeks ago that it wasn't mine. I'm sorry, Dad." I could not speak. The judge said the apology was noted. Chloe said, "I'd like to ask the court, if it's possible, if my father and I could have 30 minutes in the hallway before he leaves." The judge said, "Mr. Holloway?" I said the only thing I had left. "It's her hallway too." 12. We sat on a bench in the hallway outside Courtroom 4, in Portland, in November. I did not sit close to her. I did not touch her. We sat in the same silence my father had kept with me after my mother walked out in 1978, in this same courthouse, in a different room. She said, "Dad, did you ever get the fishing pole back?" I said no, but the picture of you with it is on my mantle. She said, "I remember that pole." She said, "I'm sorry I called you Marcus." I said, "It wasn't your fault. It wasn't your fault for any of it." She said, "Did you get married again?" I said no. She said, "Are you lonely?" I said, "I was lonely. I'm not as lonely." She said, "I'd like to come see the cottage sometime." I said, "The door is open. It has been open for 4 years." She said, "I'm going to try, Dad." I said, "I know you are." She stood up. She said, "Are you going to be okay?" I said yes. She said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I am sure." 13. Richard called 2 days later. He said, "Marcus, I owe you an apology. I have spent 11 years being told what to believe about you, and I was wrong." I said, "I appreciate that." He said, "I want you to know that Marin and I are separating. I am not asking for your forgiveness. I am telling you, for the sake of your daughter, what is happening in this house." I said, "Thank you." He said, "Marcus, did you ever in your entire life not show up for Chloe?" I said no. He said, "I believe you." 14. Marin called 3 weeks later. I did not pick up. She left a voicemail. "Marcus, I am not going to apologize on this voicemail. What I did was bigger than a voicemail. I am in counseling. Chloe is in counseling with a different clinician, one I did not pick. I am selling the house on the harbor. The only thing I have to offer you is the truth, and I am going to give it to you in person when you are ready, and I am going to wait." I did not call her back that day. She called again in February. I picked up. I said, "Marin, I am willing to meet you in person. I am willing to do it once. I am not willing to do it for your sake. I am willing to do it for Chloe's." She said, "Where?" I said, "The diner in Brunswick." "The back booth?" She said, "The one with the coffee ring?" I said yes. We met in March on a Tuesday at noon. We did not hug. We did not shake hands. We sat across from each other for an hour. She cried. I did not. I had used up my crying on the back step of my shop in October, the day the therapist called. She told me in pieces what had happened. How she had been angry for so long she had stopped noticing what she was doing to her own daughter. How Richard had been so invested in the story she kept refreshing it for him for years, even after she knew it wasn't true. How the sentence had grown until it was bigger than both of us. How she had, in the end, signed the affidavit herself, in her own hand, because she was afraid that if she didn't, Chloe would, and Chloe would not know how to write it the way Marin wanted it written. I listened. At the end of the hour she asked, "Marcus, what do you want?" I said, "Tell Chloe on the phone, with me off the line, that the sentence was a lie. Leave me alone for 6 months. Then let her come to the cottage on her own schedule without your permission, and don't ask her what we talked about when she comes home." She said yes to all of it. We paid separate checks. We left. 15. I am 60 years old in the late spring of 2026. Chloe has come to the cottage 4 times. She has her own key. She calls me Dad, on the phone, on Sundays, and once on a Tuesday when she was upset about a paper, and once on a Friday when she was upset about a boy, and once on a Saturday when she called to say, "Dad, do you remember the off-white you painted upstairs?" I said yes. She said, "I like it." The picture of her at 4, holding her first pole, is on the mantel again. Next to it is a second picture, from this spring, of the 2 of us on the dock at the cottage, in the early morning, both holding fishing poles, both smiling, not catching anything, not pretending to. She is 19. I am 60. We are standing in the same light, on the same dock, in the same town, that my grandfather fished from, that my father worked in, that Ellis Carney lived on, that I have been allowed to keep. That's what happened. 6 words changed everything. The folder finished it. The hearing closed it. The cottage holds it. If you've ever had a sentence written about you by someone else, if you've ever been called the wrong name by your own child, if you've ever had to prove who you are to a courtroom, drop me a note in the comments. I'll read it. I won't be able to answer every one, but I'll read it. And if this channel has ever made you feel like you're not the villain in your own family, you're welcome to subscribe and stay, because there are more stories like this one, and most of them end better than you'd expect.